What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to For the Millie. I am Alex Blickle at AlexBlickle1 on Twitter, joined by the DFS GOAT TwoGun at TwoGunFF on Twitter. Week 2 now in the books, except for this Monday night game. We're going to cover Showdown. We're going to cover some pick six, and we're going to recap this Sunday slate with some few extra notes on our brand new GPP scores as well. TwoGun, how was this main slate for you this week?
Absolutely terrible. I just keep losing at DFS. Of course, my main ideas were Amari Cooper, Ladd McConkey, and Deontay Johnson. So I guess I'm supposed to lose. I even was under on Cooper Kupp a lot in terms of ownership or whatever, and it didn't matter. See, when you go contrarian, your ideas still need to be good. You can't just go contrarian and have terrible ideas. I a little bit of Alvin Kamara, but I didn't have him nearly as much as Pacheco and some other guys that were okay but not great. And what I wanted to bring up though is, as much as I've been getting annihilated at main slate DFS, which happens, I lose, and then boom, I'll win $1 million or two, and it's oh, it's all good. I meant to do that. I've actually been winning at pick six, and you're comparing a guy that's basically got a minus 90% ROI right now or something like that at maybe minus 90% might be good so far this season. And I'm winning at pick six when a lot of my picks were Ladd McConkey, Amari Cooper overs. A lot of my favorite DFS plays were my pick six plays. But because I actually correlate my pick six plays and put a little bit of thought into it, I'm doing okay. Mm-hmm. Which makes me think, hey, what happens when I have a week or two when I'm actually right? Which may never happen to you because I might just be old and stupid, but it could happen. It could happen. Just saying.
It definitely could. We, I think we both, by the way, were kind of in the same boat here this week, where, as you put it, just because you're contrarian doesn't mean that you can just play bad contrarian ideas. And I think we both kind of feel like, looking back on the slate, we overthought the slate a little bit. We both understand that we're going to lose more often than we win. That's the nature of our style of play. But that doesn't mean that when we lose, we can just say, oh, I just got unlucky and it'll bounce my way next time. We still want to evaluate our plays. And to that point, I think one thing that I noticed, and I actually noticed this as that Minnesota and San Francisco game was going on, that the GPP scores made a pretty spectacular stack really easy to land on. And I didn't give it enough thought. And so I wanted to bring this to everybody's attention a little bit, just kind of showing how easy it would have been to build one of the best stacks of the entire slate. So let's start by looking at the wide receiver position and the top of the GPP scores. Justin Jefferson showing up near the very top here. He was near the top. Actually, I think he was number one all week until Sunday morning when Lamb leapfrogged him just barely, but still obviously was a great play, Jefferson himself. And then if we flip this around and we look at the worst GPP scores at the position, check out how many of these guys were $4,000 or below. Yoshivas, Lazard, Tyler Johnson, Demarcus Robinson, Adonai Mitchell, Jalen McMillan. So if you could have found somebody in this range that was actually a good GPP score, man, would that have been valuable. And sure enough, there was one guy, one receiver under $5,000, not just $4,000, under $5,000 with a great GPP score. It was Jalen Naylor right here. Naylor was great. Jefferson was great. Darnold was great. So you have a pretty spectacular double stack to start. And then you check out the tight end position and you see George Kittle was way ahead at the position. So you had a double stack with a bring back that did super well. It leveraged the mega chalk, Deebo Samuel and Jordan Mason really well. And both of those guys did well, but they didn't smash the way that Kittle did for his position. So man, it was so easy in hindsight, and I just needed to give it a little bit more of a chance. So I think, my biggest takeaway from week 2 was let the GPP scores do more of the work than I did this week, and let my conviction takes, the one I had on Taysom Hill, for example, that take about Taysom having a bigger role, larger role in week 2 in what should have been a more competitive game, it came to fruition on Underdog. I had a great week on Underdog because Taysom Hill, higher than 15.5 rushing yards, was one of my kind of core picks in that regard. It helped me on pick 6. It helped me on prize picks. And I can leave those conviction individual player takes to that type of game, the pick 'em games, and then just let the GPP scores guide the DraftKings play. And definitely going to be one of my big goals for week 2.
Yeah, it was interesting because, like, again, I liked expensive tight ends, and they were all terrible, But I did have some good tight ends. Laporte and Kittle were the other two I liked, and they did well. So it's easy to really overthink things with DFS. Sometimes less is more. That's why you just do fewer lineups, put a little bit more thought in your lineups, and that's just the way to go. With pick 6, I think it's a little bit different. I actually think it's okay to spray things around on the main slate on pick 6. You use your favorite ones. You just make sure you're correlating as you go, because it's not about having some weird ownership thing and getting first instead of 7th or whatever it is. It's not about first or last. It's just getting stuff right on a binary level. And where we are in pick 6 is most people don't understand at all what they're doing. They just choose their favorite ones. They don't realize that they're playing against other people. They don't realize how correlation works. So it's just a much easier game. And you're right. Like, when it comes to, like, if you have some high conviction one-offs or this or that, you can use it on pick 6. And I think that's, it's helpful. But in general, with that game, I'm really excited about it. Tonight, it's a little bit more, it's a little harder to correlate as much on these one games. But you still can, and you can get some massive payouts if you think about it, and you think about what the public is all going to pick, which player, and having a few go the other way on that player. You don't have to do every single one of them against the public on that, but having a few, kind of like thinking of it as, like, George Kittle was only 3%. Having, like, if you're going against a player that's like 90% going one way, have it like 50-50 on him. But the 50 that you're going with the public, have it make sense as part of a game script, not just randomly choosing like the public does.
Right. You hit a I think it was like 103x 6-for-6 play back.
It ended up coming down a little bit after, like, they scrubbed some things, but the idea is, like, if it's totally random, you're gonna get about 20x. That's the average. But, like, I'm seeing on these on these showdown ones, 40, 60x. You're going to get the really high payouts on the showdowns. On the main slate, it's almost like rinse. Like, I actually broke even on the main slate at pick 6 this week, even though, again, my ideas were Lad McConkey over, Deontay Johnson over, Bryce Young over. I still won one. I won my one where I game scripted the Ravens game correctly. I basically just took, let's see if I can bring it up real fast. Yeah, I basically just did a Gardner Minshew stack, and I did a Derek Carr stack. That's all I did. Two stacks, and boom, it hit, and I got 20x, which is typical. But really, I was just right about 2 quarterbacks.
Right.
I was wrong about 10 quarterbacks. I was right about 2 of them. And it just so happens that I had those 2 in the same lineup. Imagine a week where I'm right about 8 quarterbacks and wrong about 4. It's going to be a lot easier for me to win.
Yep.
But when I was doing a deep dive into looking at everyone else's lineups, and that's how I think of this. I think of it as lineups.
Yep. Oh, 100%. That's exactly what
I went through like 50 of them, and I graded it good, bad, neutral, and correlation. I'd say 11 were good, 37 were bad, and 2 were neutral. And by the way, one of the bad ones was, like, I didn't see many pros in there. One of the bad ones was from a pro. He just did his favorite, selections that week. Which, when you're doing that main slate, it's so easy to correlate. You might as well just correlate. So I don't expect more than 20x on a Sunday because it's so much noise. But on these island games, we can kind of sometimes think about some scenarios where if we hit it, the payout will be, 50x plus.
Yeah, 100%. And you're definitely going to get those, like, super high payouts more often in these island games because it's much easier to, number one, predict what everyone is going to do, but then also, like, there are only so many picks you can take. And so the most popular picks on the slate are going to be 50% used or something like that instead of 5 to 10%, 15%, something like that. So that's when you get those super big payouts like the 100x that you got in that first Monday Night Football game. We got another Monday Night Football game, of course, tonight. What we're going to do here is we're going to end up talking a lot of pick six, and we both agree on our favorite starting point, the favorite pick to build around. We're going to give that pick out once this video on YouTube gets to 25 likes. So get it to 25 likes, and we'll give that pick out. In the meantime, we're going to talk a lot of Showdown now. So, TwoGun, we both also have kind of the same strategy for Showdown. We're trying to identify the narrative, the type of lineups that people are going with, and then we want to leverage that. What do you think people are going to do tonight in Showdown?
I think most people are going to build for a Philly beatdown. That's how they built last night for a Texans beatdown on a similar spread. And if you look at the betting on like DraftKings Sportsbook, they'll show like how many teams are betting on what side. 93% of the bets are on the Phillies. Or not the Phillies, the Eagles. My bad.
Hey, it's Philly season. You can root for the Phillies all you want. We will accept you.
I also think that people are going to probably overuse kickers a little bit. At least overuse Jake Elliott in a way that they shouldn't use him. Like they're going to, use him with Jalen Hurts. Generally, you don't want to use a quarterback with a kicker unless you just think it's going to be a beatdown. Kind of like the game last night was a weird beatdown.
Mm-hmm.
So
you're right. The kickers have
a lot of Eagles, 4-2 Eagles, 5-1 Eagles, but it's more like they're going to spend like 45,000 on Eagles, and they're going to put like Bijan or like one other Falcon in there. Yeah. And people aren't going to use Cousins at all, or like they're going to use Cousins very little. They're going to use the Falcons defense not at all. It's going to be very, very Philly based. So I'm trying to build lineups for either a close game or even the Falcons winning, which would kill my Survivor lineups, by the way. I'm in the Circuit Survivor. I have 5 left. 3 of them are on the Eagles. So if the Falcons win, I'm probably going to win at DFS, and I'm going to lose those Survivor lineups, Survivor entries. So whatever.
Well, go Birds. Shout out to Chris Meany, another Eagles fan. Happy to see you in here. And TwoGun, you've got a fan of the taxi cabinet behind you.
Yeah, just wait till I move my new house next year. I might be doing this by my lazy river. We'll see. We'll do some really weird shit on live streams next year. Especially we get enough viewers, so I can like maybe convince the wife to let me do a few little wild things without her, divorcing me and taking half my shit. Not worth it to do that on a live stream. But
we're on track to get to 25 likes on this video pretty quickly, I think, judging by the movement that I'm seeing now. So, reminder to everybody: let's get to 25 likes, and we will send out that favorite pick 6 pick, which means we better hurry up and talk through this Showdown. So I think one of the things that you and I discussed kind of backstage here is that when people are selecting their captains, they love to have a reason to pick a guy. And I don't think there's any better reason than AJ Brown is out. So people are going to absolutely love clicking Devontae Smith's name in the captain spot. So the number one question for me is, how do I leverage that? And I think that the best answer is to say, well, what happens if the Eagles just say, you know what, we don't have A.J. Brown. We're going to let them pay a lot of attention to Devontae Smith now. We're going to scheme some stuff for Dallas Goedert, but more than anything else, we're going to trust our dominant offensive line and our superstar running back Saquon Barkley and just run it down their throats. It's a game script and a game plan that we've seen the Eagles use successfully a bunch over the last couple of years, and I think there's a good chance we see it tonight, in which case Saquon captain, fade to Devontae Smith, then just kind of do whatever you want from there.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely building for an Eagles beatdown. You do a Saquon captain, and you probably use the Eagles defense. I think Saquon's going to be very popular too. I think Saquon and Devontae, everyone's going to want Saquon and Devontae Smith in their lineup, and it's probably better if you just do one or the other.
And to be clear here, it's not that both can't succeed. Of course they can both succeed. In fact, they can even be positively correlated in a way where it's like maybe there's a drive where Devontae Smith catches 3 first down conversions, and because of that, Saquon ends up scoring a touchdown. There absolutely are ways in which they both can succeed together. And in fact, I'm not totally opposed to having Devontae Smith in a lineup with Saquon as captain. But I think the main point there is there are also paths where, man, it's like Devontae Smith ends up with 5 catches for 45 yards, and Saquon has a huge game, and you just get so much leverage if that's the case when you're fading Devontae instead of just using him in the flex instead of the captain position. So that's what we try to do. We build for those takedowns, and I think that's a really good way to do it tonight.
It's funny because I feel like everyone's overlooking the guy that benefits the most with A.J. Brown being out, and that's Jahan Dotson. Like, why are they bring this guy over?
I don't think you're wrong. I would say I think two things here. Number one, I think that people are overreacting to the fact that we only had one game sample last year of Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown out, and Devontae had a fantastic game. I think it was like 8 catches, 140 yards or something like that. So I think people are overreacting to a one-game sample. But I also think it's just as likely with a new offensive coordinator that there's just more creativity this time around where it's, all right, we have more playmakers than just Devontae Smith. Because remember, last year when there was no A.J. Brown, it was basically just Devontae. Now they have more ways to scheme open Dallas Goedert, get him the ball, use his yak ability. They have Saquon out of the backfield. They just have more ways to find success offensively without AJ than they did a year ago.
Right. But I'm saying, like, I feel like Jahan Dotson, like, he's 4K. Like, I like him. He's in 2/3 of my lineups. Maybe I'm an idiot, but I feel like this is what he was brought here for. And he's not really getting as much of an ownership boost as we expected.
Yeah.
Looking at our our numbers that you guys ran. So I like Dawson. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I also like what's it called? Jeff Wilson in that Miami game. That was terrible. But
I think you're right though. And I think what I would say here is he's like the quintessential play tonight where if he were really chalky, I'd be saying we don't know that he's any good. We don't know that he'll be part of the game plan. We don't know that he's really established himself or learned the playbook well enough to become the true wide receiver too. But he's not going to be that chalky. And so now there's a chance that he knows the playbook. There's a chance that they're going to treat him as a true number 2 tonight, and he's going to be peppered with some targets and have some opportunities down the field to make plays, in which case he's a really solid play. So I'm with you on Dotson for sure.
And he's kind of a pivot off of chalk Devontae Smith, quite frankly.
Yes, without question.
Chalk Dallas Goedert. So
yeah, it's weird. I'm not seeing as much of a boost for Goddard's ownership as I expected to see. And I think that's largely because last year he just didn't have any of those like splash games. He didn't score enough touchdowns, things of that nature. So I think he's going to stay in a pretty reasonable ownership range, but I could be wrong about that. But I do think if you want to put like some rules around this, I think if you have Saquon captain and you don't want Devontae, you want to truly fade him, then I think you also maybe want a rule of at least one of Goddard and Dotson.
Yeah, well, we keep talking about the Eagles, and it brings back my initial point. People are going to roster Saquon. They're going to roster Devontae Smith. They're going to roster Jalen Hurts, and they're going to roster Dallas Goedert. That leaves you Jack for the Falcons. People are going to probably want to roster Jake Elliott after, seeing some of these kickers go wild.
Yeah,
they're just not going to roster. You're going to get very little Kirk Cousins. You're going to get next to zero Kirk Cousins. I mean, for a quarterback. Like, what are we at on, like 25% or something like that?
Yeah, and a captain ownership under 1%.
Yeah, it's just I honestly think Kirk Cousins is dust, and the Falcons aren't that good. Like, in my defensive, I really faded Kirk Cousins in best ball and faded big time Drake London in best ball. But every bone in my body says you have to take Kirk Cousins tonight. You build for Falcon stacks. Yes, of course you're not. Of course you bring back it with an Eagle or two, but you spend just as much as more on the Falcons. That's what my gut says.
Yep. Yeah, it's tough because I feel pretty strongly that the Eagles should be favored by the amount that they are. I think it's a pretty fair line. But our betting model has the Falcons actually as a very slight favorite. And so our model basically is really, really high on all the Falcons, showing tons of leverage on the Falcons. Our Sims basically say you want a Falcons captain, especially one of the pass catchers. And I think one of the biggest takeaways looking at the Sim data that we put in the Showdown article today is that we expect something like, 3-4% of lineups, maybe even less, to be 5-1 Atlanta stacks And yet we were showing that as optimal over 15% of the time. So massive, massive leverage if you believe what the betting model is telling us, just going to these Atlanta stacks and just hoping that this Philly offense is a little bit lost without their main guy, AJ Brown.
It doesn't even have to be lost. Like, they're cheaper. So if they put up similar amounts of points, like, it's just going to end up being a better lineup, because you just end up with, especially if their fantasy scoring is more efficient. Like, if the Eagles basically go through one or two guys and you have that one guy and the Falcons kind of spread the ball out through Cousins, then it's going to be better to have more of a Cousins-based stack.
Yeah. A couple questions here. The first, if using Dotson, do you still like Saquon as captain? What I would say here is, if you're using Saquon as leverage off of Devontae Smith, you're kind of implying that Jalen Hurts isn't going to have a ceiling game, because if he was, Devontae's probably going like 150 and a touchdown or something like that. So absolutely, if you go to Dotson, you can leave Saquon as the captain instead of Hurts. Next question, if you are building a 4-2 Falcons, do you want Hurts to be one of the Eagles? This is a pretty good question, I think.
I think it depends what your other Eagle is. If your other Eagle is a pass catcher, it's fine to have Jalen in there. If your other Eagle is Saquon or the kicker, then no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree there. And the other thing I'd say is the Eagles' production should be pretty condensed. Yes, Dotson can have some opportunities, but I think primarily it's going to be one of three guys: Devontae, Saquon, and Goddard. So because of that, like, you very much can go to two skill position players without Hurts, especially if one of them is Saquon. So I don't think you need to make Hurts one of the two, but you certainly can. With that, do you have a favorite Falcons captain if you're trying to go a little bit heavier on Falcons?
I'm going either Bijan or Kirk is who I'm going for captain when I go with the Falcons.
If you're going Kirk Cousins, how many of his pass catchers do you want, and are you leaving Bijan in or out of those lineups?
That's what I'm deciding right now, to be honest. I'm like, right now I have actually a Jahan Dotson captain, and I have a Bijan captain lineup, and I want to put in a Kirk Cousins lineup, and I'm just not sure what to do with the other stuff. So I'm kind of messing around with it a little bit.
I think the only strong take that I have for a Cousins captain lineup is that you want Darnell Mooney, because I think one of the ways that Cousins becomes the optimal captain without it becoming London or Pitts is that he kind of spreads it around and has an explosive play to one of the guys who isn't a core part of the offense, like a Darnell Mooney. Whereas, without that explosive play touchdown to Mooney, for example, it's going to be really hard for Cousins to become optimal as the captain, because if he's throwing a lot and doing really well, chances are London's going to outscore him or Pitts is going to outscore him. And then the final thing I'll say there is I think Bijan also works with Cousins, because so much of what he can do comes in the passing game. Had 5 catches for 43 yards in game 1, and there was a lot of just like scripted stuff for Bijan in the passing game, so I don't think that's going to go anywhere.
Yeah. I don't know. It's what I'm looking at right now with my Cousins lineup. It's actually a 5-1 Atlanta stack. The idea being Kirk Cousins just kind of lights it up against the Phillies defense, which we never really know how good this Phillies defense is. I feel like sometimes it's like, oh, you got to attack him in the pass. Oh, this Phillies defense is good. Who knows? It's early in the season. Like, the idea is Kirk Cousins looked terrible in game 1. Everyone doesn't want to use him. So I'm going to use him, and I'm going to just make him make him my central part of my lineup and see what happens. If I'm putting him in captain, I actually think I have him in every single lineup right now.
I'm being told that's now 4 times on the show today that you have called the Eagles the Phillies, which is great.
Well, I'm old, so I'm allowed to say what I want. I'm allowed, once you hit 40, you can do these things. Like, it's presidential at this point, right? Like, half the time the president doesn't know whoever the president is, half the time they don't know what year it is. So it makes me more, what's it called? Like a matter or something like that,
It just tells me that we're close to October baseball, and that makes me happy. It's a great time to be a Phillies fan. So with that, we are 2 likes away from giving out the lock of the night, if you will, on pick 6. Obviously not a lock, but when we use that term, what we're saying is it's just a fantastic building block. Yes, it can lose, but man, if we're right about it, we're going to be set up for some really big payouts. So let's get that final now. Like we just got to 24, and then we'll be able to give that one out and talk some pick six. Any final thoughts from you on the Showdown slate? Maybe some available cheapies or anything else that you want to touch on?
Not really. I really think really my favorite cheapie and just favorite player from a standpoint is Jahan Dotson. And you have to remember, when you have a cheap guy as your captain, you're predicting a shootout. That's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to fit in a bunch of position players. So just kind of keep that in mind, how you build your lineup. Expensive guy, more control game. Cheap guy, shootout.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's something we've touched on a bunch on these shows, and I completely agree. I think the only other thing that I would say is I think Ray McLeod, I believe he had 4 receptions on 7 targets in game 1 for Atlanta, and I do think that he's a viable piece. I also think there's a chance that we see a little bit of Britton Covey offensively for Philly, where I think when you're dumpster diving that far, I mean, Covey's only $1,600. One thing that you're asking is not just, is this guy going to be on the field, but if he is on the field, is there a chance that the play is called specifically for him? And I think, given what he can do in the return game, just having the skills of this guy is dynamic with the ball in space, we could see, some wide receiver screens designed for him or some end arounds designed for him if he's on the field. So there are some places you can go dumpster diving, but I think personally, I'm going to try to bottom out my lineups, probably with Dotson. But I would say, if you are going heavier on Atlanta, I think Tyler Algier at 3,600 is pretty solid. He didn't have the snap share in week 1 that we saw last year. Last year was very kind of even split between Algier and Bijan. Doesn't seem like that's going to be the case this year, but we just saw Khalil Herbert was optimal last night, or at least close to it, with 2 carries and 2 receptions. It's just so happened that one was a goal line carry, and Algier could be the exact same type of play tonight. So if you need somebody else in that range, I think Algier is viable.
I actually like Algier more in pick 6. I like his rushing over. If you're making a lineup where the Falcons don't suck against the Phillies or the Eagles, I forget the name. I forget what it is. Because it's the team from Pennsylvania or whatever it is.
Yeah. All right, let's talk some pick 6. We got to those 25 likes. So first of all, shout out to all of you for hopping on to the YouTube side of the show. Appreciate it very much. And thanks everybody for really hopping in and participating in the chat. In fact, let's answer this question as well. Do you think they'll scheme Smith to the outside without A.J. Brown potentially hurting his ceiling? I think what they're going to do with Devontae Smith is kind of move him all around, trying to just get him in whatever position they feel he's most likely to have success in. They're going to treat him as the number 1, and Kellen Moore has shown an ability to do exactly that, which I think counters Atlanta's ability a little bit to just say, all right, there's no A.J. Brown. Let's just sell out to keep Devontae from having a big night. Also, I think we'll see Devontae used in motion a little bit, pre-snap, things of that nature. So I think it's more just there's no A.J. Brown. We know the Eagles are going to try to get the ball there, but there's also that big variable of what if they just say, instead of trying to find other ways to succeed in the passing game, we just dominate possession and run down their throat. And I don't know that Atlanta has what it takes to stop that.
Yeah, I mean, there's various ways you can go about it. When it comes to pick 6, I try to think of just a bunch of different kind of game scripts and build my pick 6 lineups for those game scripts.
Exactly.
Because it's so easy to correlate on the main slate. You just do quarterback, 2 wide receivers, quarterback, 2 wide receivers, or whatever. And you could be a little more, you could try a little harder to even correlate one game. But with pick 6 on one game, it's a little bit tougher to purely correlate everything, but you still can do it.
You can do it, but also if you're going QB wide receiver, QB wide receiver, wide receiver, you know that other people are going to be using that same strategy. Maybe not as often as they should, at least given the main slate, but you know that in doing so, you're kind of eliminating the possibility of getting this huge payout. And so that's kind of what we're going after here on pick 6. So with that, let's jump over and let's talk about this core pick, this building block, if you will. And it goes right back to what I was talking about with Captain. People love having a reason for making a selection And no A.J. Brown is a reason for people to choose more on Devontae Smith's 73.5 receiving yards, just like no Christian McCaffrey last Monday was a reason for people to go more on Deebo Samuel rushing plus receiving yards. And you got 100x payout starting with the less than on Deebo. We're going to do the exact same thing tonight. We're going to go less, 73.5 receiving yards on Devontae Smith. And again, that is not us saying that we think Devontae is going to go less than 73.5. It's us saying that so many people are going to be on the more side of this that we're giving ourselves a chance for a huge payout if we go less than. And it's not like we think it's a bad line. So a really great building block here. And where do you want to go from there?
I feel like there's different ways you can correlate that. Mm-hmm. You can do the simple thing is do Jalen Hurts under as well.
Yep.
You could also not take a position on Jalen Hurts' passing yards and do something else on him and take like a Jahan Dotson over or like a Dallas Goedert over, basically saying they're going to spread it out to other guys. Those are two different ways you can go about, correlating a Devontae Smith under in different ways. Like if you go under on Jalen Hurts, that's very basic, and there's going to be some other people that do that too. But if you kind of go over on another guy, like a more random guy, that's kind of a way to actually have some correlation, saying he's going to throw it a certain amount of times, but it's just not going to be the Devontae Smith.
Yeah, I don't know if they are watching the show here with us, but it seems like all the passing yards and receiving yards stuff just went down. I don't see any news that just broke that we are missing, but I could be wrong, but let's see.
Well, they're constantly refreshing them, so you have to just I can do it right now. They're constantly moving these numbers.
Yep, they're all back.
If people are hammering them a lot in one direction.
They are all back. So I think less on the 73.5 for Devontae Smith. As you said, we can then go less on 225.5 for Jalen Hurts. And I think the logical next place and just a phenomenal starting point for 3 picks, so 3 of the 6, is to go Saquon Barkley more than 76.5 rushing yards. Again, you're just saying the Eagles take a very run-heavy approach. We've seen them do so successfully a lot over the last couple of years. That's without even having the type of running backs that Saquon Barkley is. And it seemed in week 1 like all concerns about the loss of Jason Kelce, at least in the run game, don't seem to be worth much thought, because Cam Jurgens was great as the center in the run game, and Mekhi Becton, the new right guard, was pretty spectacular for Philly. So maybe that was just because Green Bay can't stop the run, and maybe we'll have to quickly change our thoughts again about this offensive line. But I think this is a very, very likely path for how this game goes. And then that's basically one thought that turns into 3 victorious picks here.
And, another idea, if you're kind of going with that game script, you're basically going with the game script of the Eagles beatdown. Let's just be clear, and that's fine. Instead of doing Jalen Hurts passing yards, do Jalen Hurts passing attempts. Take the under on that. Mm-hmm. Because basically saying they scored, he doesn't need to keep throwing it all the time. Generally, if a quarterback is throwing a lot, it's because he's coming from behind. Not, because they're in the lead. Like, how often did Josh Allen throw the ball last game?
Yeah. If you went to Hurts less passing attempts instead of less passing yards, would you also want to switch Devontae Smith, or would you rather just stay with the receiving yards and knowing that that's the one that more people are going to select?
It doesn't really matter. I'm just saying it's either way it's very correlated. Probably if you're going passing attempts, it's even better to go with completions.
Yeah, I think so too, which is why I think I would rather just stay Hurts
receptions, but they actually don't have a reception one for Devontae Smith.
Okay.
So,
well, that makes it a little bit easier. Then I was going to say I think I would still rather stay with the receiving yards for Devontae Smith, just because I think one way in which he goes less than 73.5 is Atlanta just says we're always going to keep a safety over the top. They can throw it 15 times to Devontae, but they're all going to be, 8-yard gains instead of 28-yard gains, things of that nature. So I still would prefer the yardage, in large part just because I think that's where people are going anyway. But but yeah, it's a good conversation, and it's a great thing to point out that typically speaking, attempts, targets, completions, receptions, like those are even more correlated than the yardage stuff.
I just want like everyone to like look at like the Buffalo game against the Dolphins because let's face it, at the end of the day, we only can remember what happened like a week ago. I mean, I can't even remember what the Eagles or the Phillies or wherever they are from. Like we're not running a bunch of stats here from like past, but just look at this Bills Eagles game. Josh Allen threw like 19 attempts, just 19 attempts.
Bills
like Matt Stafford threw the ball, like we talked about on their main show, the paywall show. I kind of talked about why Cooper Kupp was a fade. I said, hey, Matt Stafford threw the ball 49 times in that game because the game script was perfect. He's not going to throw the ball 49 times. If you think the Eagles are going to smash the Falcons, you take the under on Jalen Hurts' passing attempts.
Yep.
And like James Cook's, it's funny because he only had 78 rushing yards, but that's how they did it. It was just on the ground.
Yeah, I mean that's what we see all the time, and that's why the correlation is so strong in these games. And so again, like if you're building out a 6-pick play, it's not what are my 6 favorite picks. It's what's my favorite pick, and now how do I correlate around that for the remaining 5. So this is an example of a great start, the Saquon, Hurts, and Devontae Smith start. But really, you can go kind of anywhere you want. And with that, let's talk a little bit about the Atlanta side. Do you have a lean on number 1, where people are going when it comes to the Falcons, and then number 2, what your favorite picks are?
I really don't have a lean on where people are going on the Falcons. I have way more of a lean on where they're going for the Eagles.
I agree. I think part of that too, by the way, is the fact.
Go ahead.
Part of that is the fact that typically we know that people like to take more than selections, but man, everybody loves to make fun of how bad Kirk Cousins has been in primetime games. So this might be like the one time that people are actually enthusiastic about taking less than plays on somebody's passing yards and receiving yards, things of that nature. So I'm with you. I don't really know what people are going to do with these Falcons.
Yeah, and yeah, that's. I would say people are going to probably correlate wrong when they try, but I'm not going to be. I'm not trying when I'm building my lineups for pick 6 on the Falcons. I'm not building based on ownership on the Falcons. Like I care more about that on the regular showdown. With the pick 6 ownership, I'm focused squarely on Eagles overs. That's what everyone wants. They want the Hurts overs. They want Devontae Smith overs, maybe Barkley overs. The other thing I must point out is I feel like when we have these island games, people abuse the rushing yards on Jalen Hurts way too much. Like they're going to want to go over, which I think is under is better. But I generally don't want to use that line because it's not really correlated with anything.
Yep.
It's not like I definitely have a stance on the under, and so does our our statistics say that. But I'd much rather you can correlate the quarterback so well, generally, that unless it's just a weird lineup without like a clear correlation otherwise, I just don't want to use it. And I think people are going to waste their correlation on that a lot. So that's my other stance. I would say taking a Jalen Hurts under rushing yards might actually be a way to get your payout boost if you're right, because some people will take the over because it's exciting. That's all I can really think about. Other than that, it's really more one-off than just not. Don't take like a Cousins over and like over on every single receiver and over on Bijan's rushing yards. Like, come on. Kind of keep it a little bit more subdued.
Yeah, I think another point there is I think when you go to Atlanta, you can correlate it in a couple ways. Number one, you can just take the pieces of Atlanta in whichever direction you think correlates best with whatever you have on the Philly side, or you can take stances like one of the ways that Bijan might go lower than 16.5 rushing yards is if they give Tyler Algier more than 3 of 21 carries this time around. Maybe it's instead of 3 versus 18, it's 13 versus 8. And now Bijan's much more likely to go less, and Algiers much more likely to go more. So you can absolutely kind of do it that way as well. So lots of options here on Pick Six, which is why it's so fun. But as we talked about, like the really exciting part of this game is that we can correlate as much as we want without hurting our payouts. And in fact, sometimes we can really improve our payouts by leveraging what everybody else is doing.
I think another thing you do is, you could take like the Bijan, like Drake. You could inversely correlate Bijan and Drake London. Generally, they're pretty strong. Like I certainly doubt Bijan's going for over 100 yards and Drake London's going for over 70 yards. Yeah. That generally doesn't happen with this Falcons offense. But in general, I think taking stances, if you want to take use the Falcons more as a game script, less for taking an ownership stance. I generally like the Falcons in this game.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely making some pick six lineups that are Eagles beat down. Whereas my DFS lineups, I have less of them. I only have 3 lineups, whereas I'm going to have probably 20 or 30 pick six lineups. Have it all make sense. But I think generally I'm going to have the Devontae Smith unders as a way to get that money boost.
Along those lines, the final idea that I'll give here is you could say, I think Drake London has a really big game, and if he's hogging all the targets, then I'll go less on Darnell Mooney. I'll go less on Ray McLeod or less on Kyle Pitts. Similarly, maybe you would say, you know what? I think that Darius Slay is going to take Drake London out of the game, so I'm going less on London, and if Cousins isn't looking his way, he's looking to Darnell Mooney. He's looking to Ray McLeod, so then you go higher or more on both of those guys. So again, lots of ways you can correlate. Basically, what you're trying to do is tell stories with your picks, just like we do in Showdown. So these games are super similar on these island games. This makes it a whole lot of fun. Anything else here, TwoGun?
No, that's pretty much it.
Cool. One last thing. We want to, we did some research earlier today and noticed that an FTN DFS subscription saves about 60% relative to what you typically see among these major DFS sites. And we have the best ownership projections in the game. Our GPP scores are essentially trying to leverage all of these contest sims and how much more predictable people have become because of these contest sims. So you're able to leverage them at a much, much cheaper cost. We're trying to make the game of DFS more fun again for the people who are either unwilling or unable to pay those huge, huge dollar amounts for these contest sims. So if you haven't given FTN a try yet, do so. ftnfantasy.com/pricing, the DFS product. You will be very pleased, we believe, with what you see. With that, thank you everybody for tuning in. We will be back on Thursday, but we won't be on at 5:30. We'll be on at 7 o'clock Eastern for that Thursday night football game.